Hey, Big Stevie from CarSuck.com, and if you've been following along, you know that I've been working on my Jeep CJ7, swapping out the transmission. Had a 904 Torque Flight, and now I'm putting in a T150 manual transmission. The Torque Flight was longer than the T150, the manual transmission, so I had to get different drive shafts, or lengthen and shorten drive shafts. But the drive shafts I had, the rear looked like something out of maybe a front end of a Chevy truck, and the front was what appeared to be maybe a PTO shaft, so they weren't exactly what I wanted to run anyway. So the transmission came out of a CJ5. I got the drive shafts out of that CJ5. So Brother Dave lengthened this one for me. This is going to be the rear. He just cut it in two, found a piece of tubing that fit over both ends, and slipped it on, welded them all up. Didn't even have to index it because it fit nice and tight. So that's my new rear. And then the front was the right length, because CJ7, CJ5, pretty similar up front, right? But they were welded together. I mean, rusted together, you know what I mean? They'd been sitting out in the desert for a long time, and they were just absolutely rusted, wouldn't slide at all. So I had to beat them apart. Actually, Brother Dave did this one while he had it. He put it in his Sonic Parts cleaner for a while, and then and he pressed it apart. I had to press mine apart, and it took several days. In order to press it apart, I had to knock the plug out of it. This is the yoke, and this used to be in there, and I drilled the hole in it so that I could pry it out of there. And once I did that, then I could press down through there and press the long end of the drive shaft out of the yoke. But that destroyed my plug. So I looked around, nobody seemed to sell them. Wasn't that hard to make. Basically, cut out of a hunk of length of steel. I kind of laid that on there and cut a length off here, about the same width as this plug. And then used a chop saw to do that cutting. And then clamped the two together. I had to beat the old plug back flat because I ended up prying it out of there. Took a pair of vice grips, clamped the two together, then I used this, the old one, as a pattern for the new one, and just belt sanded it down until it was round right to the edge. Trying not to screw up my pattern because I had to make two, one for the front, one for the rear. And then I got them to where they fit in the old hole, and I just tapped it in there with a hammer. But just to make sure, I went ahead and tack welded it. You can see a couple bumps there where I just tacked it. So after a bunch of sandblasting and wire wheeling and repainting, we're ready for assembly. Here I'm putting a new Denny U-joint in. I'm going to use the ball joint press to do this, but I've got a bunch of videos. Actually, I've got 4 videos on how to install universal joints. I'll put a link to those. Just click on the eye in the circle, upper right hand corner, and I'll put links to, I've got one on how to use a ball joint press like I'm doing here for both disassembly and reassembly. I've got one on how to use a hydraulic press, one on how to use a vise using a large socket, small socket for pressing, and one on how to use a hammer, just using a hammer and something to rest the cross on. So you can check those videos for more detail if you don't know how to do the U-joint, or if you'd like to see some other methods of how to do a U-joint. I'm showing some of the steps here, you know, pressing it in, moving the cross into the caps while you're pressing it in so you don't mess up the needles. Put the clips in. Here I'm putting the grease zerk into the cross, and while I'm at it, I'm going ahead and putting the grease zerk, the new one, in the yoke. Doing the other end, showing a little bit of that, the long end of the drive shaft. Then we're going to install a new yoke seal. I got this from Denny's Driveshafts. I'm only saying that because it's kind of hard to find.
It's two pieces. You got the rubber piece there on the left, and then the retainer cap on the right. Those four little tabs that we're going to bend in. As always, when installing a seal, I'll lube it up first. Especially important this time because you got to kind of stretch it over the splines and get it down to the narrower part of the drive shaft. Oh yeah, don't forget the retainer cap first. And you got to force that rubber seal over the splines and slide it down. Then once it's on the narrower part of the shaft, the cap will fit over it. And here's the yoke. It's got this recessed little ring cut into it, and that's where we're going to bend those four tabs into to hold it on. Go ahead and put a little assembly lube on it. We're going to grease it later, but just make everything slip well while we're assembling. Here I've pushed that retainer cap over the end of the yoke, and I'm bending the tabs into that ring that I showed you, that cut ring. There's four of them, so you can do the one, then I'm going to rotate it 180 and do the other side. Then I'll do the other two as well. I'm just using a chisel. Not hitting it hard enough to cut it, just enough to bend it in. Small hammer, little tap. So here it is, all assembled, slides back and forth, and there's the bent in tabs to hold that seal on. So that one's ready to go. A lot easier to do when you got the tub off. You don't have to lay on your back or get down in the oil change pit. Here I've got a new U-bolt, also Dana. Comes with all the hardware. Got the strap. And a couple lock washers and a couple nuts. There it is, assembled. These are supposed to be between 15 and 20 foot-pounds, but it's kind of hard to get a torque wrench in there, so about that tight.
I just got to grease it up, do the front one, and move on to the next project. Jeep on.